Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm Catherine Hadro in our Washington, D.C. studio. Thanks for joining us. In this week's show, the incoming chair of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee speaks to us about the crisis on the border and how Catholics are called to uphold the dignity of every life. A well-known atheist slams Pope Francis and promotes abortion for people with disabilities. We speak out against our culture of death. And this.
I hope that being Catholic really shapes everything that I do.
Pro-life Democrat Representative Dan Lipinski opens up about his Catholic faith. But first, our top story. The Supreme Court says a California law forcing pro-life pregnancy centers to promote abortion violates the Constitution. The High Court ruled 5-4 on Tuesday, striking down the California law known as the Reproductive Fact Act. The law, which took effect in 2016, forced pregnancy centers to provide free advertising and referrals for the abortion industry. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion for the case, National Institute of Family and Life Advocates, or NIFLA, versus Becerra. Pro-life groups are applauding the court's decision, calling it a victory for free speech rights of pro-life pregnancy centers. We have in studio a pro-life panel to break down the decision, including the president of NIFLA. But first, we go to Capitol Hill for reaction. Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma joins us now. Senator, thank you for your time.
Yeah, glad to be able to be with you.
First off, what's your reaction to the Supreme Court ruling in favor of NIFLA this week?
An incredibly significant decision that comes out from the Supreme Court. It's a 5-4 decision, and in many ways the surprising part is that it's 5-4. It's that divided. This was a case, as many people know, where the state of California was reaching into pro-life centers that are nonprofits and saying, I know that you do not like abortion, but we're going to compel you to promote abortion from your location that opposes abortion. That should seem like a slam dunk case, but it ended up being a 5-4 decision. But it's a good decision, not only for free speech, but for freedom of religion, that no individual in government can say, I have an opinion different than yours, so you have to say my opinion, not your opinion.
Can you expand on the important role free speech plays in our nation?
Yeah, free speech is foundational in our country. From the very beginning of our nation, we set up as a country to say that the government doesn't have the right to be able to tell individuals what to think, what to say, what to believe. So this freedom of speech is not only a freedom just to be able to say and to speak to your family and speak at your business, it's also to be able to speak different than the government. That was the foundation of our Constitution.
Abortion groups label pro-life pregnancy centers as deceptive and harmful. What's your response, Senator, when you hear a pregnancy center being labeled a, quote, fake clinic?
So pregnancy centers often have a medical professional that's there. They provide emotional support, they provide counseling, and they tell people that they have options. Many times when they go to other centers, they say pretty much your only option is to get an abortion. And so we want to be able to say, no, there are other options. There's adoption option. You can carry the child to term. We also want to give them information so they can make their own choice. Pregnancy life centers are locations where they can get medical assistance, they can get additional information, but they can also find out the details not only about how the health of the mom is doing, but also the health of the child.
And finally, Senator, prior to being in politics, you directed a Baptist youth camp in Oklahoma for 14 years, I believe. Today, you frequently promote civility in politics. That being said, do you have advice for our pro-life viewers on how they can better dialogue about abortion and being pro-life with people who disagree with them?
The joy of America is we've got everyone with every opinion that's out there, and we can have often a great dialogue with people that's a respectful dialogue. For some reason, that's getting lost in our society now. We're on many university campuses. People are being shouted down if they disagree with the dominant point of view. Even in California, where they're trying to be able to tell people that are pro-life, no, your opinion doesn't matter. In fact, we're going to give you our opinion. You have to be able to say ours. It's a good thing for us to be able to maintain dialogue, but maintain respectful dialogue. As a Christian myself, I look at the writings in 1 Peter chapter 2, where it talks about how we have respect for government and we actually represent our faith based on how we honor authority. That's a really important biblical principle, but it's quite frankly, it's an important life principle as well, that we have civil dialogue with each other and disagree. The life issue is especially one of those. A lot of emotion, a lot of intensity in that conversation, but it all boils down to one simple thing. There's a child in this conversation. That child has 10 fingers, 10 toes, unique DNA, a beating heart, a functioning nervous system. They have a future if they're given the opportunity to be able to live out that future.
Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, thank you for your time.
Great, thank you.
We are joined now in studio by our pro-life panel. Thomas Glessner is founder and president of NIFLA, the nonprofit that went up against California's Attorney General at the Supreme Court. Kristen Waggoner is senior vice president of the U.S. Legal Division at Alliance Defending Freedom, the law firm representing NIFLA, and Chuck Donovan is president of the Charlotte Lozier Institute, whose group filed an amicus brief in the case. Thank you all for being here. It's a big week for the pro-life movement, isn't it?
Thank you.
Tom, first off, what's your reaction to the ruling?
Oh, I think I've had happier days, but I can't remember them. It's been a three-year battle against the state of California on behalf of our 145 pregnancy centers in California and 90 of the medical clinics. Their free speech rights were violated, and they've been working for 3 years under this heavy oppression from the state, wondering if the state's going to come in, close them down, and fine them.
And Kristen, as the group representing the case, can you summarize the majority opinion here?
Well, the decision was very broad, and it was a win for all Americans. We're delighted that the pregnancy centers are protected and they can continue to do their life-affirming work, but we're also delighted that the court sent a strong message to governments across this nation that all Americans have the right to be able to speak consistent with their convictions, particularly on issues that involve deeply important and deeply controversial subjects.
This really is a free speech case, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Chuck, can you put this into perspective for us in the pro-life movement? How significant is this ruling when it comes to pro-life pregnancy centers?
Well, it's huge. It's basically a recognition that they must be free to act, to save lives, to counsel women, to provide extraordinarily amounts of free services to women. It's a victory for families, for men, for women. And it means, I think, that other states or jurisdictions that want to limit pregnancy centers are going to find it very difficult.
Kristen, there are similar laws to what we saw in California and Hawaii and Illinois. What does this mean for them? What can we expect next?
We can expect to continue to win those cases. The court, again, sent a strong message to any state that would seek to pass a law such as this and restrict the speech of our pro-life pregnancy centers, that it is unconstitutional to do so. So we'll be prevailing in both of those cases, we're confident.
Excellent. And Chuck, you're working on an extensive report on pro-life pregnancy centers across the U.S. It's forthcoming, not out yet. But what preview can you give us? What information can we know now?
Well, it's a vast amount of good news. This is the third in a series. The first two were produced at Family Research Council. They're called A Passion to Serve, and it's exactly what the report shows. Pregnancy centers continue to expand. They occupied the services of 67,000 volunteers. They served in the last year, 2017, something like 884,000 women. They offered 401,000 free ultrasounds, and now about 26% of them offer STD testing. They're increasingly medical, they're going to where the need is, and they're more effective than ever. Really
playing a pivotal role in our nation, isn't it? One question that I have is, in the dissenting opinion, Justice Stephen Breyer brought up this point, saying that California law should be upheld, not struck down, because it's previously upheld state laws requiring doctors tell women seeking abortions about adoption services. So what's your response to that?
Well, my response is that that's not a comparable circumstance. In those cases, that's under informed consent restrictions or guidelines. And here, there's no medical procedure or medical intervention that's being done. In an abortion context, you're having a medical procedure, and a doctor should be required to tell you the risks and benefits of that procedure. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to try to compare a woman that is coming into a pregnancy resource center is not having a surgical procedure. She's simply being advised as to whether she's pregnant and given the opportunity to have resources, practical information, emotional support, information at these clinics, which is a great thing.
Tom, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
This is not about informed consent at all. That requirement in the Pennsylvania Casey law dealt with a doctor who's going to perform an abortion, and before the abortion is performed, he gives her this information. We're not performing medical surgical procedures. This is pure free speech, and they tried to regulate and dictate what we were to say.
Thank you for that clarification, and thank you all three for being here this big week for the pro-life movement and free speech.
Thank you.
Pro-life pregnancy centers play a pivotal role in today's world. These centers support the life of both the mother and the baby, often providing free resources like ultrasounds, maternity clothing, baby clothes, parenting classes, and more. Volunteers and workers at pregnancy centers are at the forefront in building a culture of life, directly helping families in need. And even though the Supreme Court handed pregnancy centers a major win this week, these very centers are still under increasing pressure from abortion groups to refer clients to abortion, which goes against the very core of their mission. In the face of any pressure from pro-abortion groups, let us pro-lifers show our support for pregnancy centers. Sign the petition to say you stand with pregnancy centers. Here's how you can add your name to this petition of support. Go to your computer or smartphone, open up your web browser, and type in prolifeweekly.com. Again, the website is prolifeweekly.com. Once you arrive to this website, you can simply type in your name and submit it to sign on to this petition that says you stand with pregnancy centers. Here are more reasons to support pregnancy centers. Based on research from the Charlotte Lozier Institute and the March for Life Education Fund, pro-life pregnancy centers provided almost 2 million people with free services in 2017 alone, and nearly 70,000 volunteers serve pregnancy centers. That includes medical and legal professionals. Let's tell those volunteers we are grateful for their pivotal work to build up a culture of life and support the family by signing the petition that we stand with pregnancy centers. Simply go to prolifeweekly.com to add your name. Moving now to our next big story, federal agencies are working to reunite the more than 2,300 migrant children who were separated from their parents at the U.S. Mexico border. The reunification efforts come after President Donald Trump signed an executive order last week. About 500 minors have been reunited with their parents so far. The U.S. bishops have been vocal against any immigration policy that separates children from their parents. I spoke on the phone earlier this week with the president of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo of the Galveston-Houston Archdiocese in Texas. He says one aspect of being pro-life is always trying to keep families together.
From our point of view, what we look for is a family unity. We look for how we can keep families together. So this disassociation of children from their parents, we say is wrong, and it's a real mark against the respect we owe to the dignity of the human person. I see no reason why a person highly dedicated to the pro-life issues relative to the beginnings of life and abortion would necessarily have to step aside from the immigration issues.
For more on this, we go now to Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, the incoming chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Pro-Life Activities. Your Excellency, thank you for your time.
You're welcome. It's good to be with you and your viewers.
Thank you. First off, what's your reaction specifically to the news that more than 2,300 children were separated from their parents at the U.S. Mexico border?
Well, this was a great tragedy, and like so many others, I was very disturbed by this policy and the images of these children being separated from their parents. And glad that the president, I think because of the outcry of many individuals and particularly religious leaders, Protestant and Catholic, like our president of our conference, Cardinal DiNardo, spoke out against this. And I think the president said he was influenced by his own wife. So I'm glad that he rescinded that policy by executive order.
Can you explain, Your Excellency, especially as the incoming chair of the USCCB pro-life activities, what the Catholic vision is for upholding the dignity of life for every person, from the unborn person to the migrant person?
Yeah, Catherine, we, as a church, we have this consistent ethic of life, which really springs from our conviction that every human being is made in the image of God, but even more than that, that Jesus Christ gave his life on Calvary for every human being, no matter what stage or age of development, no matter where they were born, no matter what their economic status might be. So we see every human person as precious in the eyes of God, and therefore we care about upholding the dignity of human life and protecting human life and upholding the dignity of the human person in every circumstance.
As Catholics who are concerned about upholding the dignity of life, how should we be thinking about these life issues in a practical sense? How should we view the immigration crisis in regards to abortion? What do you suggest our framework as Catholics should be?
Well, I think first of all, we should be concerned about both, and we should pray and do all that we can to help our nation and its public policies in both of these areas. The problem is sometimes we can allow the politicians to divide us, but as Catholics, we're really unified in our common concern for the unborn child, for the frail elderly, for the profoundly disabled, as well as for the migrant and the refugee. So we always have this common vision, and our challenge is sometimes finding political candidates that represent that vision.
We really do as Catholics have this both and approach as opposed to this either or, it seems.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your Excellency, for the everyday Catholic in the pew who wants to respond to these attacks on life, who is concerned about abortion, which kills about 1 million lives every year in the U.S. alone, and who is concerned about what's happening on the border, how should everyday Catholics be responding? How can Catholics discern what they are called to in their role to uphold life?
Yeah, Catherine, I mean, again, I think each of us has a unique contribution that we can make, and none of us can do everything. So some of us need to be involved at the crisis pregnancy centers, but others need to be involved with caring for the immigrant and the migrant as well. Again, I think where this gets difficult is trying to prioritize these issues when you come to making choices in the election booth. And sometimes that's where Catholics, I feel pulled sometimes in opposite directions.
Is there any further guidance you'd like to give on that, Your Excellency?
Well, I think in terms of, there are some distinctions that we can make. One is that there's certain acts that are always wrong, they're always evil. And one of those is abortion, taking the life of an innocent child. So that in every circumstance has to be opposed. There are other issues like the immigration issue. Now we have to be concerned about the migrant, the refugee, but there are prudential judgments here in terms of how there are legitimate responsibilities that governments have to protect their borders. The government has a legitimate obligation, to have an orderly immigration policy. And so what that right balance is, there's good people, good Catholics can disagree, but we all have to be working for this common concern of policies that really uphold the dignity of the human person.
As this crisis on the border is ongoing, Planned Parenthood and other pro-abortion groups have been vocal about it. And online, for example, they're tweeting out messages like families belong together and keep families together. What do you make of abortion groups claiming to promote and protect family unity?
Well, I mean, we have to be a little bit cynical. We're glad for everybody that supports keeping families together, but we have to remember that Planned Parenthood actively works against parental rights in terms of abortion and has tried to prevent parents from being involved with their daughter's decision whether or not to have an abortion. So it seems a bit disingenuous. And the church calls her people always to be generous, generous in their openness to life as married couples, generous in terms of being open to adoption and foster care, generous in terms of supporting crisis pregnancy, but also that as a country we need to be generous in terms of welcoming refugees and immigrants. This has been part of the great tradition of America.
Thank you for that reminder and for your guidance on this issue as our nation continues to discuss it. Archbishop Joseph Naumann, incoming chairman of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Pro-Life Activities, Thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Catherine. God bless.
When we come back.
Look at what this man, through all that he went through, and still was the witness to hope. That really helps me a lot, and I ask him to pray for me.
Representative Dan Lipinski, one of the few remaining pro-life Democrats, opens up about his devotion to St. John Paul II and how else he leans on his Catholic faith. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Hadro. Pope Francis recently spoke some of his boldest words yet against abortion, and a popular leader in the new atheist movement is not happy about it. Richard Dawkins, an evolutionary biologist, writer, and often referred to as the most famous atheist in the world, tweeted out this message early last week. And you thought Francis was the good pope. Abortion to avoid birth defects is not about eugenics. It's about the avoidance of individual human suffering. What he was referring to, based on a news article link in his tweet, was Pope Francis's bold statement against abortion for babies with disabilities. In off-the-cuff remarks this month, the Holy Father said, "Last century, the whole world was scandalized by what the Nazis did to purify the race. Today, we do the same thing, but with white gloves." Thank you, Holy Father, for highlighting the discrimination of the unborn in the womb. Most babies prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome, for example, are aborted. In fact, Iceland touts their record of aborting nearly 100% of babies with the genetic condition. So, Mr. Richard Dawkins, how do you define eugenics? Merriam-Webster defines it as the practice or advocacy of controlled selective breeding of human populations to, quote, improve the population's genetic condition. Killing babies with a genetic condition would fit the eugenics description. Dawkins says, though, it's about avoiding suffering. I have news for him. Avoiding suffering is humanly impossible. But we know, as Catholics, as Christians, we have hope that suffering can be transformed and transfigured to be used for good when we unite our suffering with Jesus Christ's death on the cross. No amount of suffering is devoid of meaning, and every life is worth fighting for at all stages, from the womb to the tomb, no matter your health or condition. Yours too, Mr. Richard Dawkins. Let us all be there for our brothers and sisters suffering on this earth. That is true compassion. Remember, there is always something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com to sign the petition saying you stand with pregnancy centers. The Democratic Party has grown more extreme on abortion over the years. The party's latest platform has been called the most pro-abortion platform in history, and today there remain only 3 pro-life Democrats in the House of Representatives. One of those members is Representative Dan Lipinski of Illinois, the co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Pro-Life Caucus and a practicing Catholic. In part 2 of our interview, the Illinois congressman opens up about the role Catholicism has played in helping him remain pro-life under pressure. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, who is chairman of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee, has written that the Democratic Party has abandoned Catholics. As a Catholic yourself, would you agree with that? Do you see that happening?
It greatly concerns me what the Democratic Party has done in many ways. It is difficult to be a practicing Catholic and be accepted by many people in the Democratic Party. It's important that we put being Catholic ahead of whatever political party we are in. I see a lot of people in the Catholics in the pro-life movement who will reject me because I'm a Democrat. And they put being Republican, I believe, some of them put being Republican first. And there are people who would not come to my aid in the primary because they don't want to support a Democrat. And I think that is also a problem that we're seeing here. I think that partisanship, cannot come first, unfortunately, for more and more people it seems to come first, and I think that's bad also.
Congressman, you have a busy life here on Capitol Hill. How do you lean on your Catholic faith? I'm curious, do you have a special devotion or a specific saint that you frequently turn to for intercession?
Well, certainly during this past primary, I had a few people tell me to ask Saint Joseph to pray for me, and certainly Saint John Paul II. As from the time that I was, I'd say so much of my life he was a pope, and being a Polish pope, and in so many ways he is someone who went through some of the toughest times imaginable under the Nazis, the communists, things that he saw happen, the Holocaust, yet he remained hopeful. And that's something that, in the tough times up here, I always look at it and say, well, look at what this man did, and look at what this man, through all that he went through, and still was a witness to hope. That really helps me a lot, and I ask him to pray for me.
It's beautiful. Finally, Congressman, you have not shied away from your pro-life views at any point, and you've been attacked for it. Has it been worth it?
It's been worth it because really, when it comes down to it, there's nothing more important than sticking to what I believe. There's nothing here on earth that is worth giving up my soul for. I'm going to continue to be pro-life. It'd be very much easier for me politically if I changed my position, but that's not worth it. It's not worth. This is a very important job, obviously, being a member of Congress. But what's most important is that I stand up for what I believe is true and right. And it's not only on the issue of life, but on other issues. I am here to do what I think is right, not just to get reelected. And so I'm always gonna stand firm because life. There's nothing more important than in the world than protecting life.
Congressman Dan Lipinski, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Thanks for being a part of it. Until next week, you can reach us anytime with questions, ideas, comments by emailing us at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.